So here we are for our second session of this Johannesburg practitioners class. And we have to take up this subject of prayer. Because when we say prayer, we do not mean what the dictionary means when it says prayer. When we say prayer, we do not mean what any church means when it says prayer. We have an entirely different meaning for that word. And so, you may read a lot of books in the world and have them all refer to prayer and say, why, they say the same thing. They would if the word prayer meant the same thing, but it doesn't. Now, to begin with, our use of the word prayer has no connotation of going to God for something. It has no connotation of expecting God to interfere in our affairs. It has no connotation of trying to influence God to do something for us. It has no meaning at all like turning to God for healing, for supply, for blessing, for anything. We don't mean that at all when we say prayer. Prayer with us is an inner attunement whereby we can become receptive to what God has to say to us, or an inner attunement whereby God's spiritual blessings can be revealed to us. In other words, it is not like going to God to be heard. There was a Christian Science practitioner in New York City many years ago who said that many people go to God for an audition instead of for an audience. And there is a very great distinction. If you're going for an audition, if you're going to tell God something or to sing a song to God or give God a message, you have no sign of prayer in our meaning. When we go to God, it's for an audience. We go to kneel humbly before the presence and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." So prayer to us is receiving, not telling. Prayer to us is becoming aware of, not asking, not affirming, not demanding, not expecting, except expectation in the sense of that if I'm praying, if I'm in an attitude of prayer, I'm in an attitude of receptivity, and I'm expecting, of course, the whole grace of God to be my sufficiency. So you see that when we speak of prayer, we do not mean praying to God. We mean being in an attitude of prayer which is a receptivity to the Word of God. Now, when you live a life of prayer, what Paul calls prayer without ceasing, when you live a life of prayer, which means on every occasion just, "All right, Father, I'm listening," and go about your business, you build up that state of receptivity, and then what happens is what happened here with these wisdoms of the infinite way. Every one of these wisdoms was given to me in this way. Sometime during the night I would be awakened out of a sleep and receive the impression that I was to jump up, and I did, went to my desk or sat up in bed if I were in a hotel like this, always have my pen and paper handy, and one or two or three wisdoms would come through. It took 2 years for just these few pages of wisdoms to be given to me. Then after they were given to me, I gave them to 22 students and let them have 2 years to absorb them in consciousness before I let them become public. Now, There are many students who will not understand these wisdoms because they're not man's wisdom. They were not given to me by man's wisdom. They were given to me by the Spirit of God, by the voice of God, and they require spiritual wisdom to understand. And I just want to illustrate that in a few of these cases so that we have a correct understanding of prayer and its effects. It says, begin your spiritual life with the understanding that all conflicts must be settled within your consciousness. There is never a conflict with person or condition. Well, let's stop right there, because that is contradictory to everything that's happening in human experience. Who says there is never a conflict with person or condition? Why, we're always in conflict with people and condition. That's right, so we are. That's absolutely right. Humanly. Spiritually, that is not true. Spiritually, it can never be true. Whenever there is a conflict within me, you can be assured that it is not a conflict with you, even if you seem to be involved. It is a conflict within me regarding my concept of you, or my relationship with you, or my activity with you, and so there is no call for me to correct you or change you or reform you. The call is for me to go within and re-establish within myself the truth about you. Then when I come out of that, there is no further conflict. Then we are in agreement. In the same way, there is no conflict with a cough. There is no conflict with a sin. There's no conflict with a disease. The thing is that to my sense, there may be a conflict because there seems to be something out there that I'd like to do away with. Sometimes somebody out there that I'd like to do away with. But that can't ever be true because God said, call nothing unclean that God made. And so it can't be that there's anything erroneous out there. Therefore, it is I who am entertaining a false concept of that which exists to my appearance. So there's no use of fighting a cough, there's no use fighting a cancer, there's no use fighting polio, there's no use fighting sin, there's no use fighting tyrants. Let us go within and have a little talk with ourselves. Okay, what really is the truth? Now, of course, I'm speaking from a spiritual standpoint. Well, the truth is that God is infinite. Oh, come now, that can't be true. How can God be infinite and out here is a sick person, a sinful person, a dying person, a poor person? Yes, that's an appearance. That's the suggestion that's coming to you. That's the temptation that Jesus had to meet in the wilderness, that he was an hungered, or that he didn't have enough fame. That's not the truth. The truth is that God is infinite. The truth is that God is the law, the only law, to every situation. The truth is that God is the only substance, the only cause, therefore God can be the only effect. The truth is that God is the life of individual beings. And so goes on this conflict, argument that must be settled within my own consciousness. Then when I come to that place where I have, let us call it, used right reasoning and reasoned it all out and come to right conclusion now about the situation, now I'm just halfway home because I have done nothing yet to the situation. I have only resolved it within my own consciousness. Now I have to wait for that he uttered his voice, the earth melted. I have to wait for that inner assurance, that inner click, that deep breath, that release, that assures me that God is on the field, then when I look out, I find that that which was causing the conflict is no longer there, and peace is established. If it isn't on that first treatment, I may have to give a second one. I may even have to give 200 before I reach the point where the whole thing has been resolved into its nothingness. But there you see that this argument is not our prayer, nor have we gone to God and asked him to do anything about this person or their body or their sickness or their sins or their lack. All we have done is ignore God for the time being until we ourselves established ourselves in the correct letter of truth. Then we waited for God to put his seal on the thing, for God's presence to be established, and then, of course, the harmony appeared. Now, and it goes on to say, therefore make the correction within rather than attempt to change anyone or anything in the without. And so it is with our healing work. You may be called on once a day or 100 times a day, but don't try to change your patient. Ah, yes, that brings us to another difference in our manner of working. Perhaps in your metaphysical experience, you've had a practitioner say, now, if you just weren't so jealous or envious, you could get your healing. You'll have to overcome your jealousy or your envy. Or some other practitioner would say, well, now, you're too hateful or too this, and you'll have to overcome that first. Or someone else, you've heard it, that resentment causes rheumatism, and hate causes cancer, and jealousy causes cancer, and so forth and so on. Now, if you had the power to change your patient's nature, or your own for that matter, that might be a very nice way of doing things, but it usually doesn't work, because, as Paul says, the good I would I do not, and the evil that I would not, that I do. In other words, supposing I know this minute that I have a nasty disposition in some direction or other, and I say to you frankly, I know I have it, but please tell me, how am I going to correct it? How am I going to get rid of it? I've tried for years and years and years, but it doesn't change. And then you're going to tell me, but it has to change before you can get a healing. Now you've made it hopeless. But you see, that isn't the truth at all. The truth is this. A false trait of character is just as much of an error as the disease that it's supposed to cause, and it's just as much of an illusion. So to try to get rid of the trait of character would be just about equal to trying to get rid of the disease itself. Neither one of those are necessary in spiritual ministry. What you have to do is ignore not only the disease, but the mental trait that claims to have caused it, and get back into yourself in the realization God is the only cause. God is the only causation. How can you acknowledge resentment to be a cause? How can you acknowledge hate, envy, jealousy, malice to be a cause? It is also said that we have nothing to fear but sin. That's nonsense. Because if sin were going to interfere with the healing, sinners couldn't get healed. But the Master came specifically to heal sinners as well as disease. So sin can't be a barrier. Sin has to be healed the same way that a bad temper has to be healed, or alcoholism has to be healed, or rheumatism has to be healed. And they're all healed in the one and the self-same manner through the realization of God, through the realization, through the Spirit speaking through you. Now, part of this whole human experience, and this is true in metaphysics, is that humanly we are under the domination of thoughts. You yourself have seen this in that We are all swayed to some extent by propaganda, some more and some less. If the propaganda is just strong enough, we'll all fall for it. If the ads are powerful enough and well enough written, we'll all buy the product. If we're in a theater and somebody cries fire, we nearly all get panic-stricken. In other words, humanly, we are subject to thought. If we go in a room where there's a hateful person in the midst of their hate, we'll almost feel the black cloud of poison that they're emitting. If we go into a room where there are kindly people, sweet people, generous people having a good time, we will feel the uplift of their thought. We all are influenced by thought, but in this work you have to learn to overcome that. And you have to learn to overcome that in this way. Living out from the center of being, you are untouched by the thoughts, opinions, laws, and theories of the world. Nothing acts upon you, since you do not react to the world of appearances. Now, you see, there isn't a word of truth in that, so far as the human world is concerned, because all of the laws of the world and all the laws of the government and all the laws of nature and all the laws of heredity and all the laws of matter are operating in our experience. Why kid yourself? They are, humanly, and they are only overcome in proportion as you yourself specifically lift yourself from the domination of human laws, materia medica, opinions and theories and all these other things, and make yourself attuned to the Spirit. Now, when it says nothing acts upon you, it also tells you when and why and how. Since you do not react to the world of appearances. Now, you see, there is where you come in again, not God. You. For the time being, this is you. If you are living in tune with God, and I say to you, you're a lot of thieves. Well, of course, all you're going to do is smile and say, what a fool. It isn't going to hurt you. You're not going to react to it. You're not going to get insulted. You'd only get insulted if it were true. Then you'd react to it, you see. But as long as it isn't true, you're not going to react to it. You're going to say, poor fool, to entertain such an opinion. Now, if I, however, come along and say, I think you're coming down with flu, that's quite a different story. All of a sudden, I wondered, was I out in the draft today? Now, did I get my... there's the reaction. If, however, you're in tune with the Spirit, you say, nonsense. It's too bad you're subject to such beliefs, but no truth in it at all. I'm subject not to flu. I'm subject to divine influence, the influence of God. And so it is that the whole of the thing lies in our reaction. Now, if a patient calls up, or someone calls up for a patient, and says, oh, this patient is dying, rush over here right away. If you rush over there right away, I'm afraid they're not going to get well. Because you have reacted. You have accepted that suggestion. You have just acted as though it were all true. Whereas, if you just say, yes, I'll be there, and then go quietly and sit down in a corner and say, who convinceth me of death? That's what the Master said. Who convinceth me of sin? Who convinceth me of death? Who is there that can make me react to the belief in a life apart from God? So you're not treating your patient, you're treating you. Your patient has nothing to do with this. This is your belief, not the patient's. You don't know what the patient's thinking. The patient may think that's all nonsense. But at this moment, you're the patient. You're the one who dare not react. You are the one who must sit down and get so clear that until you have arrived at the point of consciousness where you say, well, go ahead and die if you can, but I doubt that you can, so I'll come there. Then when you get there, you'll find your patient on the mend. Then you can sit there quietly and receive your divine impartations. But if you've already reacted in fear and jammed your clothes on you and called a taxi in a hurry, and then there's no use going there, because you're not going to bring about that healing. So it is in any way. When sin is brought to your attention, if you immediately start condemning that sinner, one of the ways in which I learned this lesson was, and this happens to all practitioners who have active practices. They have both men and women come to them. And if you could hear the stories some of the women tell about their husbands, and some of the stories the husbands tell about their wives, the first time you get to believing it. Then later you meet the husband or wife and you find out they were crazy. They were just prejudiced. They just didn't know this individual. And you'll find out, as a rule, that that's what actually happens. Through close living together, one does get a grievance or grudge or something or other, and they never see the other one then in the true light. And so if they go to describe their husband or wife to somebody, it's from the standpoint of their limited and often incorrect vision, whereas other people say, I don't see that in this person at all. Now, the point that I'm making is, if I come to you and say that I'm sick or I'm sinful or I'm dying or I'm poor, do not react to that by believing it, but also do not turn around and believe the opposite. If I say I'm sick, don't believe I'm well. If I say I'm poor, don't believe I'm rich. Don't react by going to the opposite, but go down the middle and say, I don't think you're bad and I don't think you're good. I don't think you're rich and I don't think you're poor. I don't think you're sick and I don't think you're well. I think you're spiritual. And then you'll find how the miracle is worked in spiritual healing. When you are no longer throwing off the bad to exchange for the good, and going right down the middle and say, I don't care how good you are, how bad you are, what I want to know is how spiritual are you. And since God is your being, you are pure spirit. Do you see that point? That is one of our major points in our higher teaching, this, what we call the middle path. In other words, if the patient has 103 fever and then you get a call saying it's down to 101, don't rejoice. And if it's 99 4/10, don't rejoice. Because it isn't the temperature you're interested in, it is your conviction of the spiritual nature of the individual, and that never changes. If you were a doctor, then you've got to bring down the fever. If you were a doctor, then you have to worry about the size of the lump, but you're not. You are a spiritual seer. You are a spiritual student who is living not for the purpose of changing bad matter into good matter, or poor matter into rich matter, or sinful people into pure people. That's not your function. That's the function of Materia Medica and the church ministry. Your function is to establish the Christhood of an individual, not the health or the wealth or the purity. Your function is to establish Christhood. And so it is that when someone says, what a good man this is, and how pure, just say bunk. There is none good save God. That's the best answer you can make. And so when you learn to do that, and someone says this is an evil person, you can also say bunk, because there is no person save God. God is individual person. God is individual individuality. God is infinite individuality. God is the being of you and of me. So I don't believe it's good and I don't believe it's bad. I believe it's God. God being. Do you see that? Here it is. In the spiritual life, you place no labels on the world. You do not judge as to good or evil. You remember that? Who made me a judge over you? Who made me a ruler over you? while appearances may show forth harmony and discord, by not judging, you merely know is, and let that which truly is define itself. Now, supposing I don't know you, and supposing I don't know whether you're sick or well this minute, because nobody can judge by appearances, as you so well know. There are people who never in their life had a pain in their heart, and the next minute they were dead from heart disease. So I have no way of looking at you and knowing whether you're sick or well. Of course, I could judge from appearances and say you look well. That doesn't make it so. But I do not know whether you're sick or well. I don't even know if you're good or bad or rich or poor, high or low. But there's one thing I do know about you. I know that you exist. That I know. I know that you are. And that's enough for me to know. Because since God is infinite, there can be nothing to you but God. Since there can't be a God and a you. In the book Practicing the Presence, you will find the story, which I have since learned, comes out of, I think, the Persian or Muslim mystics. But it's the story of a very holy man who died and went to heaven and knocked at the gate. And God answered and said, "Who is there?" And he said, "I." Well, there's no room in heaven. Heaven's crowded. You have to come back another time. And the holy man went away surprised, thought it over, and in due time came back and knocked again. God answered, "Who is there?" "It is I." "No, heaven's still crowded. You can't come in. Come back another time. All's full up." But this time the holy man did some very deep thinking. So when he came back the next time and God said, "Who is there?" he said, "It is thou." "Oh," God says, "enter, enter. There never was room here for me and thee." Now you see, heaven is only big enough to contain God. But heaven and earth is one, and so the earth is only big enough to contain God. And so if I say I am, I'm saying God is. And that's all I know about me, is that I am. I will put no qualifications on that and say I am good or I am bad, I am sick or I am well, I am rich or I am poor. It's enough for me to say I am. If I can just keep on saying I am, I will definitely learn in very short time that I really and truly am, and all that God is I am, because there isn't any more room on earth for God and me than there will be in heaven. And so, when we are confronted with a situation of sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, let us not judge and say, now let's change that over into something else, or let's not go to God and have God intercede to change this. Close our eyes to this thing, forget God for the minute, and just say, is. Is the truth. God is. Therefore I am. He is, she is, it is, because God is. And God is infinite, and God is the only is. And then, when you have established that within yourself, that nothing exists but is, a state of I amness, then you wait until you get your confirmation from within, and then you'll find harmony revealing itself. To live spiritually is to know that all is. Then do not name, label, define, or judge what is. Be content to know is, and let what is reveal its being, nature, and character to you. And so now I sit back. Remember, I don't know you. And you're presenting the appearance to me of either health or sickness, youth or age, life or death, health or sickness. And I've sat here until I've come to this conclusion of is, and then I wait. And you know what happens? Pretty soon the words come, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." Ha! And I thought it was a human being, Mrs. Jones. And the treatment's over. Now I know not only is, but I know who is and what is and why is, and I was going to eternally be. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. You see that? Another time it comes, thou art the light of the world. Another time it comes, I am ever with thee. All that I have is thine. Well, then I say, Mrs. Jones, go on home, let's forget about this. Now you see, we go further and it says, that all doesn't make sense, does it, to the human way of thinking or treating or practicing. And that's what I say to you. This is not wisdom that came to me from man or from books. This is what came to me from inner unfoldment. Never seek anything or any condition in prayer. That's opposite to everything that's ever been written on the subject of prayer. Let harmony define and reveal itself. Let your prayer be letting the is appear. Now, if I want to pray for you, I go into my, not audition, but audience. Here I am humbly at the feet of the Master. And I let that Spirit reveal to me that thou art the chosen of God, and then I'm free. I had some months ago an experience in working with someone or for someone who was in a very serious trap of some kind. And as I waited, that which came was, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And I've lived with that a great deal ever since. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Well, all right. Once the Spirit of the Lord is where you are, let something or somebody try to bind you and find what happens to them. It can't successfully be done. Anything can be done to you as a human being, but once the Spirit of God dwelleth in you, you are free. Now, see that your prayer is not an attempt to influence God. Now, if you took that one sentence out of this book and lived with it for a month, so that every time you sat down to pray and the temptation came, I know, but so-and-so's unemployed, and they must have employment. And then bite your tongue if necessary and say, I won't ask God, I won't go to God, I won't try to get God to do anything about it. If you did nothing more than that, you'd be giving the most perfect treatment in the world until you settle back in peace and let God appear, and then you'd find that there'd be no unemployment anymore, or whatever the situation may be. You watch as you pray, you will find or treat that whether it's consciously done or subconsciously or unconsciously, you're trying to influence God on behalf, or you're trying to influence truth on behalf of some person or some condition. And you see, that isn't doing any different than when the Catholics go to Lourdes and try to get God to take the disease out of their body, or when somebody goes to some other shrine hoping that the spirit of the departed will do something for them. If you are hoping that you're going to meet with a great power that is going to do something for you, abandon hope, all ye who enter the infinite way. Because that is not what you're going to find. You're going to find that God is a state of being, an is-ness, which cannot be influenced to do any good for you. I might liken it to sunshine. It would be just as sensible to pray for the sun to be warm as for you to pray for God to be good. The sun is warm. And you might as well stop praying about it, because all your prayers won't make it any more warm or any less warm. Matter of fact, not even your sins will make it less warm than it is. And if you go out in the sun, you'll get the benefit of it, whether you're a good person or a bad one, a rich one or a poor one. Because the sun is what the sun is. Nothing's going to change it. Nothing you can think, nothing you can do. It just is. If you want the benefit, go out into the sun or bring it into your room. Now, God also is. And as you learn later, God is good, and God is love, and God is intelligence, and God is omnipresent, and God is omnipotent. If you're praying, doesn't change it. It won't make it more so, nor will it make it work in your case. It's been working all the time. All you can do is bring yourself into attunement with it. Now, it's easy because you know where it is, closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. It's within you. So the whole secret merely lies in learning to attune, to pray in the sense of being receptive, and opening our consciousness for the inflow of God, and then you'll find that that sunshine, that warmth, that light, was always within you, but you had a shade drawn, and you weren't letting it through. And the shade that you were drawing, I'll tell you, is this. You were waiting for it to come to you, and it can't. It's already within you, and you have to let it out from you. The power and presence of God can't come to you. You have it locked up inside. Browning knew it when he said, "You must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape rather than to make entry for a light supposed to be without." And anybody who's looking up to God or looking out to God or sitting back waiting for God is making an error. They are preventing the day of their own salvation. The kingdom of God is already within you, but you have a shade drawn, and that shade is your belief that God in some way must be brought to you, probably through prayer, probably through treatment, probably through a holy man or a holy woman, or probably through being good and deserving it or earning it or being worthy of it. It's all nonsense. There isn't a human being in the world worthy of God. And so you will find that as you open out a way for God to flow through, you become less of a human being. And that's where your worthiness comes through, not in being worthy of God, but in being less human and being more godly. But you can't get godly first and get God. You have to get God first in order to get godly. So don't wait to be good before you get God. Don't wait until you have the ability to read to get good, to get God. Don't wait until you are free of pain or free of poverty. That's putting off endlessly your own good. The greater your difficulties are, the more you need the conscious awareness of God. So regardless of how great the pain may be, regardless of how great the trouble may be, turn within more and more and more in a state of audience, not audition. Don't go to God and tell your story, because God is omniscience. And God knows all about you, but he knows nothing about your trouble. He knows one thing alone about you. Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Thou art my beloved Son. That's all that God knows about us. It knows nothing of our humanness, of our nastiness. It knows nothing of that, because that is merely a self-created image which we've built up inside of ourselves. It doesn't exist as a reality, so God can't become aware of it. God is too pure to behold iniquity. Now, you won't get good and get God, but in proportion as you get God, good will flow from you. You can't give up your evils and get God, but if you can get God, God will remove the evils. So don't put the cart before the horse. Don't try to get good first in order to get God and let God be the good, and so forth and so on. Now, that brings us to the reason that all this is true and demonstrable, and it is what we call the nature of error. Now, this is the part that our students like least of all in the teachings. I've even had many suggest to me that we ought to eliminate it. Because since God is all, there's no use worrying about error. I didn't look that way in the newspaper this morning. Error, in any form, is not a reality. If it were, there'd be no hope for us, because the history of the world shows that in human affairs, evil is greater than good. The world's history has always had more years of war than of peace. Governments have always had more years of bad government than of good government. All through history, this is, of every nation, no exceptions. There is, well, I don't know about your figures, but I can tell you about the figures in the United States. There's 4 times more money spent for whiskey every year than for the education of our children. They tell us that there's 10 times more money spent for movies, dances, bowling, than is spent for all of our YMCAs and YWCAs and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all the rest of that put together. Do you see that? In the human picture, evil predominates. In the evil picture, it's much easier to sell a person a television set for 50 pounds that's going to bring them murder mysteries and burlesque shows and prize fights and all of those things than it is to sell one of these books for 8 shillings. Much easier. Much easier. That is because in the human picture, evil predominates. But the miracle is this, that evil isn't a reality. And it is when you come into the picture with your understanding that the Spirit of God in you dissolves the evil of the world, and you prove it first in your own experience to a small extent, and then in your family, and then in your patients. Later on, you'll be applying it in world affairs. Then you'll begin to see why it's true. 1 second of resting in the Spirit has stopped coughs, colds, cancer, flu, and lots of things. 1 10-minute period spent in silence in the Spirit has stopped evil tempers, has stopped fights, has prevented divorces. You'd be surprised what has happened when students of truth are brought into the picture with their power. The power of what? The power of nothing. The power of the Spirit of God in them. Evils disappear. They just walk out the window, where there's receptivity to it, and sometimes even where there isn't. Now, we know in the history of the past 3/4 of a century, I'm not going back to the days of Jesus because you and I weren't there to witness it, but we have been here to witness what has happened in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the experience of those who have been led to spiritual truth. Christian Science, unity, now the infinite way. The world's history is already sufficient to prove that where a family lives according to spiritual principles, there is less sickness in their family, less sin, less alcoholism, less divorce, less fighting, less discords. That's definitely established in the United States and Canada and Europe, wherever people are living according to that standard. It doesn't mean that the record is yet perfect. It doesn't mean that we have attained 100, but remember this, that we've only begun 77 years ago to introduce the Spirit of God into human experience in this modern age. Now, we have seen school children go through their whole career with perhaps 20% as much absences from school as the non-scientist or non-unity student. We have seen whole families go through whole generations without an alcoholic, without insanity. We have seen the most unusual records established, not in individual cases, but entire communities. So that even with insurance companies, Christian Scientists are preferred risks. They are in the States. Now, the further you go with this, the more you get away from fighting error. The more you come to the recognition of the nature of error as an appearance, of course, as something worrisome while it's being experienced, but as having actually no inherent power, not even the power of continuity, no law to support it, no law to sustain it. Once you come to see that, you will watch that you'll be destroying this appearance, this suggestion, this claim, right and left as you walk through life. So you will come to see that the day will come when all of these things, which in their inherent nature are blessings, like our movies and our television and our radio, these, you know, are inherent blessings, as long as they're used for purposes of good. You will find then, but because the demand for pictures of good, music of good, and so forth and so on, because of that, all of these instruments will fall into that which in reality they are. They're instruments of God. Every one of these things, including atomic energy, these are instruments of God. Man misuses them, but they in and of themselves are instruments of good. Now, man misuses them. Why? Because that's his nature. He is more interested at this moment in the coarser things of life, the baser things of life, than he is the finer things of life. So naturally, he uses them for that end. Therefore, there is going to be no change in the nature of moving pictures or radio programs or television programs. There's going to be no change in men's governments even, until the nature of man is such that he demands the good. So let's not bother too much with the outside picture trying to change it. Let us change our consciousness by the realization that there is no pleasure, there is no lasting satisfaction in these evil things, nor is there a power of evil in the sins and diseases of the world. And don't forget, you can make the mistake of making evil more powerful than it is. I did that in a very specific way one time. Every year when the polio drive was on in the States, I don't know if you have those drives like we do, where the radios blare every 5 minutes with an appeal for funds for polio, and some actress or actor will get up and tell you the horrors of polio and the horrors of this child, and hold one of the children up before you, and so forth and so on, and then beg for your money. By that time you're so ashamed you dig down for an extra shilling or two. But I used to resent that period every year and be glad when it was over, because my thought was, and the figures bore it out, that while those drives were on, there were more cases of polio than the rest of the year. In other words, the drives were accentuating the fear. Until one day I was sitting at the desk in my office, and the thought came, well, wait, you're trying to take away the power of polio, but you're substituting by giving power to propaganda, to a radio address. Now, what's the difference whether the power is in the address or power is in the polio? It's still going to result in polio. Aha! So I learned there is no power in a radio address. There is no power in propaganda. There is no power in the impulsion of the human mind, of men's thoughts. There's no power then in this malpractice which is going on. Well, now you go ahead and fill this air all you want. And for the balance of that drive, there was only 3 cases reported. Up to then, it was 3 cases per day. Do you see that? I myself had been helping to give more power to the condition that I was trying really to alleviate. Now, there's no use of saying there's no power in cancer, but then saying, oh, hate causes it. You've just transferred the power to hate, and so the hate comes back with the cancer. And you've done nothing. But when you see the nature of error to be really and truly a suggestion of a power apart from God, then you say, but then there's no power in the condition, and there's no power in the thought that caused the condition, and there's no power in the whole of the universal mind. There was a time in Christian Science when this was so clearly understood that the early practitioners did miracle healing works. I knew of a man, in fact I knew the man, Christian Science teacher in Boston, who had a very marvelous reputation for healing. He did wonderful healing works. But I learned from one day that he didn't know much about Christian Science. In fact, Mrs. Eddy always said that he's a man who never will learn Christian Science. But there was one thing he could do every time a claim was presented to him. He'd say, oh, it's animal magnetism. Meaning, oh, that's nothing. Oh, it's nothing. And that was the end of it with him, and that brought on the healing. Well, I knew a practitioner in California who became one of the largest, most successful practitioners in the whole state. And he also had never gotten far in Mrs. Eddy's writings, although he became really one of the very top men there. But 2 things stood out to him in his early study, and while he knew very little of what was in the books, he knew these 2 things. If God is, error ain't. And that was his argument whenever, and the calls flooded. He had 2 telephones on his desk going all day. As fast as they come in, he'd say, yes, 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 I'm taking care of it, I'm taking care of it, just call me again, goodbye, and so and so and so. And all was going on in his mind was, look, if God is, this thing isn't. That was his treatment, that was his mode. Now, in both of those cases, it was a recognition of the nature of error. You see, we start, God is infinite. Now, if God is infinite, whatever error is, it certainly isn't power. Whatever error is, it certainly isn't law. Whatever error is, it certainly isn't dangerous. And so as you come into that recognition of the nature of error as something that does not have to be fought against, something that does not have to be influenced or controlled or destroyed or risen above, just something that has to be recognized as nothingness, that's where your healing powers come in. Because you must learn this, truth does not cure disease, truth does not remove evil, God does not overcome disease, God does not overcome sin, God does nothing. God just is the creative principle of the universe, and God maintains and sustains his creation eternally in perfection, and that's all you can expect of God, and that's enough. Now, when you come face to face with something that contradicts that, what you have have to ask yourself is God a liar? Has God permitted something dangerous to exist? Has God created it, or does God permit it? Does God allow it? If God could remove it, then God's responsible for the whole business. No. The nature of error, follow this in those chapters in my writings, the nature of error is a revelation of this. Whatever it is that you are hating or fearing, stop it right now. It's not to be hated, it's not to be feared, it's to be recognized as a suggestion, an illusion, an appearance, a nothingness. Then, when you've done that, wait for the peace of God to descend upon you, and you will find it to be. Now you see, some of you have already proved this in some measure in your experience. Some of you have already proved that many things that claim to be terrible in the end were nothingness. Some of you have already seen disease dissolved, fear dissolved, ignorance dissolved, hatred, envy, malice, jealousy. So some of you already know that this is true. But all of us need to work more with this nature of error until we are in such a conviction, such a state of conviction, that we can look anything in the face and say, thou could have no power over me unless it came from God. I shall not fear what mortal man or mortal condition can do to me. When we are then in that state of consciousness, we are spiritually minded. And to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Now, understand this, please. You cannot be spiritually minded without knowing the nature of error, because you'll be fearing some kind of error, whether it's a person or a condition or a thing or the weather or the climate or heredity or old age. To be spiritually minded means to have come to a place of recognition of the nature of error as no power, no thing, no substance, no law, no cause. Now you do that by intellectually knowing this first, and then realizing, yes, but just agreeing with this intellectually isn't really establishing it. Now I go into my meditation, and I wait there until I receive the conviction, and then when I do, it is so. You see, the end and object of life is to become spiritually minded. It isn't really just to demonstrate some more supply or demonstrate some more homes or yachts, or it isn't even just to demonstrate 10 more years on earth. That's not the object of life. The object of life is to demonstrate spiritual mindedness, to be spiritually minded. Whether you're only on earth 33 years, as the Master was, or whether it's given you to be on earth 90 or 100 years, that doesn't make any difference. What counts is whether or not you're spiritually minded while you're here on earth. Jesus went at 33 years of age, and the world hasn't forgotten him. And there are loads of people who have been here 100 years and aren't remembered. In fact, last week one man wrote, the only trouble with fame is that you can only be famous for a couple of thousand years and then it dies out. But you see, to be spiritually minded means to be able to live forever. And so it is that that's the goal we're seeking. We're not only seeking it for ourselves, we are seeking to show the world how to become spiritually minded, but we're trying to do it without proselyting, without preaching, without criticizing them, or without condemning them. And I want you to know that there are many ways that this is taking place in the world, that it's being brought to human awareness without any attempt to hold out that we are holier than they, or better than they, or that we have a better way than theirs, or by comparison, or by preaching, or by proselyting. And this is one of the ways in which it is being accomplished. We have a student who is an editor of a newspaper in a large American city, and every day she has to write an editorial for the editorial page of the newspaper. And since I'm here, I have received this from her. This is one of her editorials. And it's called The Peace of God. I just think on the editorial page of a newspaper, Paul speaks to us of a peace that passes understanding. This peace is a precious thing, but there are few who experience it. Such peace is difficult of attainment, very difficult. For the human mind, with its turbulence, its suggestions, its rounds of thought, must be still for a moment in order that the peace of God may enter. Now, it is impossible to still human thought forcibly. Willpower is of no avail in the matter. Quiet one line of thought through human will and another takes over. No, we must seek other means than willpower if we are to experience the peace which is of God. Contemplation of the beauty of sunset skies, the young moon and evening star, and a pondering of the fact that divine reality lies back of these in majesty and glory will tend to result in a stilling of the human mind so that God's peace with its redemptive grace may come in and take over for a moment. Or we may hold to bits of scripture, such as, "Be still and know that I am God," and "Peace I leave with you, my peace give I unto you." In such ways as these, we shall lift human consciousness to a high point, and at this high point, should human thought cease for a moment, God's peace is likely to enter. Such practice as this will purify the individual and will result in the annulling of fears, hates, self-righteousness, and human pride. Such practice will make us realize God is active in our lives. Now, you see, there hasn't been a word about infinite way or Christian Science or unity or Protestantism or Catholicism. There hasn't been a word in there that could be objectionable to a Hindu, to a Muslim, to a Christian, to a Hebrew. Only a way in which God can be realized. Do you not see that that's a spiritual underground operating in that city to bring everyone to a place where eventually the peace of God may descend upon them? And that is our object. Our object is not to make this whole world infinite way conscious. Our object isn't to turn this world into a body of infinite way students. Our object is not to add a new religion to the world. In fact, in the July letter, you will, maybe in the June letter, but I think it's in the July letter. No, I guess it is in the June letter, that it says that traveling around the world, you gather the impression that the time has come for a great spiritual teacher and a new spiritual teaching. And what I say to you, based on my travels, is this: that is not true. What we need is a deeper respect for the spiritual teachers and the spiritual teachings that are already in the world. And that is the true answer. To set up another religion will just set up another state of antagonism. But to do as our publisher friend has done, reveal that each in their own church or with no church may find the peace of God through contemplating the beauties of nature or contemplating a passage of Scripture, will bring peace into the heart so that hates, envies, jealousies, malice will be overcome. Do you see that? And so I see our work as a spiritual underground, not in which we bring people into the infinite way, but which through those who come to the infinite way are enabled to help the world understand that it isn't the infinite way that's going to save them, it is God realized within their consciousness that's going to save them. That is the peace of God descending in their consciousness, that it is going to dissolve hates, animosities, jealousies, and competitions. Do you see that? That is our function. That is why it isn't necessary ever to proselytize, to proselyte. It is never necessary to believe for a minute that the infinite way is something other than something else. It is, in the sense that the principles that are taught in it, while they're age-old, have not been revealed as a way of life, and now they are. But they're a way of life that if you search hard enough, you'll find, not only in our Bible, you'll find these. I don't mind telling you that if you were to read the original manuscript of the Sikh master Nanak, you would find most of these principles right there. If you were to read the original translations of Maimonides, the Hebrew mystic, you would find them right there. When you read John, you find them right there. When you read Jesus, you find them right there. If you read Buddha correctly, in his original things, not in these translations, you will find it there. Certainly you will find it in Lao Tse. In other words, we are dealing with the fact that God has no relationship to any church or any teaching. God is a universal is, which always has been, is now and ever will be, and is always available. So, when you are called upon then to demonstrate help for somebody or supply, don't try to direct God over to their individual being. Try to understand that God is a state of omnipresence and of omnipotence. And that includes this person, but it includes a lot of others that you haven't been thinking about. Don't ever think you can direct God to one person to heal. If you are to be spiritually minded, you have got to know that it is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that did this thing, and the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead will quicken also your mortal bodies. You've got to know the universal nature of God. When you know the universal nature of God, you know the universal nature of prayer. And then you won't pray, oh God, here's Mary Jones, or now I'm directing this at Mary Jones, because that is not prayer in its true sense. Prayer has nothing to do with you here. Prayer has to do with my ability to be receptive to the presence and power of God, and the moment I feel it here, you out there who are receptive automatically get it. It is just as if I could bring God visible here. Now, if I could bring God visible here, not one person in this room would have any fear for themselves, because with that God that close by, all fear for self would disappear. Well, that's the function of us as practitioners. Bring God. You might not be able to bring God visibly present, but you can bring God consciously present. Bring God to conscious awareness right here where you are, and that will immediately take in everybody who is reaching out to you for help. Now, of course, there is something a little more specific than that to healing work, and that is this. While it is true that if I can bring God to conscious realization right here where I am, all of you will benefit to some degree. But let me say this, that if one of you is specifically reaching out to me, if you have sent me a cable, if you have written me, or if you have thought, I'm going to write Joel for help, and I come to conscious realization, the power will reach you more forcibly than it will reach the whole room, and it will reach you virtually instantaneously. There is no reason if I were at the opposite end of the world, and you'd say, I think I'll sit down and send a cable to Joel, I'll write Joel. At that instant, Joel is where you are, because it isn't his brain that's going to help you. So it isn't his reading your message that's going to help you. It is your making contact with the presence of God which he has established here. And so any moment from the thought dawns in your mind that you're going to call a practitioner, from that moment on, any minute, the healing can take place in you. It is true, I get letters sometimes saying, I know the very moment you got my letter. I could feel it. Well, maybe sometimes it's true, but often I've doubted it because I wasn't where the lady thought I was when the letter reached me, and the letter didn't reach me for several days afterwards. So you see, it was their ability to say, oh, I know he's getting that about now. I can figure how many days it takes to get there. They opened their receptivity, and it came. But had they known that the minute they wrote or threw it in the mailbox or cable, that, or even before the letter was written, that I had received the message, that is, God had, there was no need to wait for a reply. There never is a need to wait for a reply. I have told a story to our students. There was a Christian Science lecturer in London who really and truly was a fine, fine spiritual man and wonderful healer. And he returned from a lecture tour, and one of his students lived in the same hotel with he did, and they met in the lobby, and he was just going to his office, so she said, you mind if I walk with you? Something I want to talk about? I'll come ahead. So they got into the office. His desk is stacked with mail, but on top of it is a cable. So he said, let's see what this is. And he opened the cable, and it said, I'm truly grateful for an instantaneous healing. So this teacher turned and said, now let's look through here for the other cable and see who was healed of what. As you see what a fine teacher you have, I do healing work without knowing that anybody's sick. Now, of course, that is exactly what he meant. He has to live continuously in a consciousness of God's presence. He can't be out playing bridge all night. He can't be out carousing. He can't be keeping his mind on making money. He can't be keeping his mind on anything but this God realization. If he does that, those who are receptive, who reach out to him, will reap the rewards, because he of himself can do nothing, I of myself can do nothing, you of yourself can do nothing. But to be spiritually minded is to have that quality which heals, saves, and redeems. Is that clear? Now, I also want to tell you this. We're going to meditate before we close this. I want to tell you that tomorrow, should some question remain in your mind, because I can't tell you the whole story in these sessions, if there are some questions that are in your mind, write them out, and write them out clearly enough for me to read, because I cannot always read this script that you write that we don't. Write it clearly or type it, and I'll do my best to give you the answers to it tomorrow. You can see that in 60, 70, 75 minutes, the Spirit can cram an awful lot of words out of my mouth. And I don't expect that you can remember them. And I am grateful for that. Please don't try to memorize. Don't be like the student who said to me, can't you possibly give me a thought to hold to? And I said, if I could, I wouldn't. Because then you'd have more faith in the thought than you would in God. I don't want you clinging to thoughts. I want you to have no thoughts and be receptive to God. So with this. This truth, because you are receptive, and the mere fact that you're here is the demonstration of your receptivity. This is embodying itself in your consciousness. Loads of it you won't remember. But should a need arise, it will immediately arise and come back to your remembrance. In the same way as you read the books now, passages that were not clear to you before will be clear now. And so it is, I ask you as practitioners, Please do not depend on your memory. Please do not believe that you can heal by anything that you can remember. Always be willing to empty your thought and turn to God for fresh manna. Then your healings will be all right. Don't have a storehouse full of cliches. Don't have a storehouse full of memorized passages from books and think that all you have to do is mumbo-jumbo those like a parrot and then have something happen. There are too many so-called metaphysicians in the world who know too many quotations. They depend on quotations instead of on God. Rather, be like the cloud of unknowing. Be willing to admit you know nothing, but you're ready to be filled. Every minute of every day, remember that you do not live on yesterday's manna, and you cannot heal with yesterday's truth. You can only heal with the Word of God as it comes through you in this moment. Those of you who have done healing work undoubtedly know that you have witnessed healings through specific truths that came to you. But then when you try to use them in the next case of the same disease, it wouldn't work. No, it never will, because it isn't the statement of truth that healed. It was the voice of God or the Spirit of God coming through in those words that healed. Therefore, never depend on a thing. Never depend on a thought. Never depend on a memory. Never depend on a quotation. Never depend on a teacher. Whenever you are confronted with a problem for yourself or others, be willing to empty yourself. Father, I am nothing, and all that I know is trash. For the wisdom of man is not sufficient. Therefore, give me thy grace. And open yourself, and it may come as a simple little statement like, peace be still. You say, that's all right, Father, it came from you. That's the Word of God. And then you will find that spiritual healing is really an act of God, not of man. It's an act of grace, and it's not really healing. It is the voice of God that melts the illusions of sense. It dissolves the appearances. It dissolves causes and effects. See that? Don't be afraid of mental causes or physical causes, because this Christ realized dissolves causes as well as effects, because in reality there are no causes. There is the one creative principle which is the only cause. To be spiritually minded is life and peace. Live in love one with another. Live always in love. Live without argument. Live without differences. Humanly, there has to be differences because we all have different concepts of the way life should be run. But I'm as much entitled to mine as you're entitled to yours. You're as much entitled to yours as I'm entitled to mine. Why should we quarrel about those things when we are in agreement on the main facts of life? I am thee and thou art me, for God is the only one. There's no room in heaven or on earth for God and man. And that was the original basis of the infinite way. There are two statements which you must never forget. As and is. There is not God and man, because there's no room. God is expressed as man. And also there is no future tense. God is now. That means infinity is now. Allness is now. Completeness, perfection is now. Thy grace is my sufficiency now. Thy grace is my sufficiency now. The Lord is my shepherd now. Do you see that? As and is. As and is. And then, if there are differences of opinion on these human things that come up between us, let's each cling to our own until something within ourselves changes us instead of somebody in the without. This was but nice. Thank you.